citizenship. It's the working of citizens. It's the ability for people to have a shared community. So when you think about politics, for those who don't live out in the country, think about the water that you're using, right? There had to have been some form of politics, of some sort of shared community organized in order for you to get into your faucets. If you think about the food that we eat, all the labels and the nutrition values and the ingredients on the back of it, it was politics that brought those labels to fruition so that we know what we're actually eating. When you think about the roads that we drive on, that's political. So when people say, oh, I don't like politics, I don't deal with politics at all, we as human beings are inherently and deeply political. Everything that we do for the most part is shaped around sharing a community with other people. So when you talk about politics and when we try to figure out how to talk about politics, we're talking about this idea of sharing our community with one another. So when I look at politics, when I look at our two-party system in the US, my whole rubric of understanding who I want to vote for, who I want to agree with, who I want to disagree with, how I have conversations with one another, is how is this going to benefit our shared community? With that, then there's another, it's the sexiest word in the English language that comes with it, is policy. Policy comes from politics, and it's the way that we actually organize our shared communities together. So when we're talking about politics, rather than talking about what one person is or is not, rather than talking about who one person or what some belief one person supports or doesn't support, it's really easy to get caught up in those things because those are very emotional based. However, it's actually better and healthier if you're thinking about, well, how does our community that we share together is shaped? How do we talk about the policies that shape those communities? So when you're talking about a certain party or another party or a local politician, try to figure out what the policies are, what it is that those people support on a policy level that shape the politics in which we all share together. So for me, before we do anything else, I just want you to know that that is my baseline of politics. It comes from the Greek word mean to be citizen wherever I'm at. Because spoiler, I actually don't believe that if the US falls tomorrow or something catastrophic happens in November, that the end of the world is near. Politics and governments have risen and they've fallen throughout history. And guess what? Humanity still functions. Now, I think certain policies might destroy humanity, but I actually do still wholeheartedly believe that if the United States was no longer, if we woke up tomorrow and there was no longer the United States government and there was something different, the end times, it's just part of our historical functioning, or it's just part of our shared community functioning within this larger system that we know as planet Earth.
Thanks, Patrick.
Okay, that's my foundation. Is that too much? Thank you.
I like it. It reminds me, I'll return to that if it feels important. But Brendan, I want to invite you.
I mean, say it right now.
All right, I'll say it right now. It reminds me of I was at a leadership training, which is not the place. A Presbyterian leadership training is not the place you want to say that you're not terribly worried if the Presbyterian Church completely implodes and dissolves the next day. But I did say that in some way because I'm just not sure that like the church is dependent on the organization PCUSA. And so there were some questions around that at the leadership conference. But anyways, a fellow pastor of mine leaned in and he whispered in my ear, he goes, I think you just got yourself fired.
Right. So should I just, are you saying that I can leave this meeting? Because I,
but it's interesting. I mean, and I want to put a pin in it because I want to go to Brendan here, but it's interesting to me, and I think all three of us are going to approach this from a 30,000 foot up kind of view, but it's interesting to me the way that we place faith in these organizations, when in fact, as you say, politics is rooted in being a citizen. And so if you're a citizen of any community, you're political, just by definition. So
Yeah,
it's an
we are political
existential,
beings.
yes, it's an existential issue. It's not like it's going to go away if, some particular empire crumbles.
Right.
Well, maybe.
And now it might look different,
Yeah.
but it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
Probably. Right.
Okay, Brendan, Nehemiah.
So,
You need to start.
unfortunately, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with Beck, which means I have to hold off my arm wrestling competition for another week. But the two things that I heard that I would love to reflect back on our listeners, which I fundamentally agree with. Politics means being involved, and policy is those rules or laws that affect me, right? Patrick,
Yeah.
Is that a decent summary? I'd love to hear from our friends here. Do you feel involved, for one? If yes or yes, no. Yes, what's allowing you to be involved, and no, what's preventing you? And that would lead to the second question of how have policy not been part of your community, if that's helpful.
So Brendan, you're asking the group, do they feel
I'm
involved?
asking the group,
First
do
of
they
all.
feel involved? First of all, yes. And why or why not? Why or why not?
Sure.
Because that will open up many, many avenues of conversation.
I'm getting a political text as we speak
Yes.
about a proposition in our community. So I feel involved, de facto having owned a cell phone.
Good.
Yeah. Next.
And your wife.
Let's not get into that tonight. Yeah, Ginny, please stop.
I feel involved, although I've had to set some limits on my involvement, just based on my own emotional comfort. I get concerned about having to talk to people that I don't know about voting. And I volunteered and then backed out, which I feel bad about backing out, but I could not do telephoning to people that I didn't even know. It just really didn't feel good, even though the focus was to encourage them to vote, not who to vote for, but just to vote. But I've been involved in a variety of ways over my life, more so in Durango than before.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenny.
Others, please. Okay, so we have a group of one who votes and sometimes encourages others to vote. Everybody else is in the apathetic category.
Well, I guess I
or
would
I can pose it
argue.
again. Others, pipe in. Are you involved or not?
Yeah, I mean, while we're waiting for others to formulate their thoughts,
Yeah.
The fact is whether you feel like you're involved or not, you are involved in almost everything that you do in life. So we have Jenny, who is very adamant in trying to call people to vote. We have other people who may be running for certain boards or participating in certain boards. But then even on a basic level, like, so for me, I am not a politician. However, my job is very much political because I am there maintaining that people follow the policies in which our society has put in place, not just our state, but also our municipality. So that in turn makes me a political figure, even though I don't feel like a political figure. I am functioning within politics, almost like 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week in everything that I do. But then on top of that, I live out in the country. I have a well and I have solar. So like my energy and my water doesn't come from society, but all the food that I participate in comes from society and comes from some sort of regulation, which is political. All of my news comes from some sort of political agenda and bias alternative. So whether I think that I'm political or not, I still am political, which is what like my argument at the very beginning is, or what my statements are at the very beginning.
And this raises this, that's so good, Patrick. This is the question of, or at least illustrates the distinction between active involvement and passive involvement.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what you were trying to get at. Was that the second question?
Well, yeah. Well,
is that the first question?
Either way, but no, I think it's spurred it on, as you know.
Yeah.
Are we actively involved or are we passively involved? And sometimes we think that we're actively involved and actually we're passively involved, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And part of the question is, you said, where do I get my information? From where do I receive my information? Reception of information is passive involvement, right? Which differentiates from active involvement, which would be the transition from here's the information I'm getting, and then I'm actively testing that information, if that makes sense.
Which I think, without going, I mean, I don't know if we're still leaving it open to everybody else that is listening, but that was what you and I had discussed earlier on, was that politics is just like reading the Bible, right? Like you can be a passive reader of the Bible, or you can be a passive political individual, or you can be an active reader of the Bible or an active political individual. In our lives, we are, especially in the West, we are so conditioned to be passive participants, meaning we are meant to be spectators, right? We're meant to be consumers. We're meant to be influenced, not influencers. We are meant to go to church, not be the church. Right. All of those things kind of play out. And so like, I think it was you that said, like, a lot of times we treat our politics like we treat our Bible, and we go to Sunday school and we think that's enough, rather than actually like diving into whatever it is that we're participating in, whether actively or passively.
Absolutely. And I hope, because this is a church venue, I hope that everybody heard what Patrick said, is that we treat politics like we treat the Bible. And that's not good. And so here's the challenge. We talked about giving homework. So let me ask the audience here, because then I'll extend it to the next conversation as an illustration of what Patrick and I are talking about. And Bo, who was the best king of Israel, Saul or David?
And that's
open up.
That's the homework assignment. That's what we're diving into.
I open it up. Like, visceral reaction, right? Like, this is politics, man. We're talking about kings. Who was better, Saul or David?
So is this merely to illustrate?
You don't get to answer, Bo. This is for
I'm asking because this is
I gotta look back on answer
for next week.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the question. I'm listening. I just gotta go check on my son.
So do I. He's not here. Sorry. Honestly, friends, just visceral. Okay, I put up Saul versus David. Who's better king?
David.
Who said that, please?
That was Bo.
Oh, geez, Bo. Come on.
I think this is a fair question. We'll wait until a couple people answer. 2 to 3. And it's not a trick question.
It's not a trick question. It's what both Patrick and I and Bo would answer.
I'd say David.
Thank you.
Laura.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Laura. Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else?
My group.
I say David too.
Thank you.
I would say David, but he got better publicity.
Ah, that's what I would say. I like that, Joe.
Well, we got your three, Patrick, and I'll sort of I don't know. Spoiler alert. We can bring up the passages later, but if we compare what Deuteronomy and First Samuel says about what a good king should do, the reality is biblically, Saul was a better king.
Right. And what are those 5 things that Deuteronomy and Samuel says that a good king should do? Do you have them?
I have a few in my head.
Okay.
One wife.
Right.
And Saul, there's every indication indicates that Saul only had one wife. David had, of course, well, multiple. The king should not institute census, which means he shouldn't have any army. And by the standards of First Kings 11, Second, if you're looking, Saul did not have a standing army. You should not have horses and chariots. While as David did, it's indicated that Saul did not have those things. And then Patrick, I'll have to go back to the text.
I actually have to go back to the text too, which is what I was doing right now, because I did a sermon on this like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But I have been out of the pulpit for so long. So you had wife, census. What were the other ones? Sorry.
The other one, but I could say other one. I think there was something about horses and chariots not being taken from Egypt. Oh, also, do not take your sons and daughters, and that might be 5 and 6, for conscription. Well, maybe that's part of the census, but also your daughters working for him. So there's no indication that Saul conscripted workers, either female or male, which would be army / whatever that might be. The point being is, thank you to the individuals who answered. The larger point is don't treat the Bible, or vice versa. Don't treat politics like you treat the Bible. We have this idea of who's the great king. Of course it's David, because that's what we've been told. But if you look into the evidence, there's two, and Patrick will confirm this, there's 2 rules for king, one in First Samuel and one in Deuteronomy, and David does not adhere to those rules. Saul actually does. I hope that makes sense. So this is not a debate about, yeah.
Just to jump in, because I'm curious, we have 12 or so people in the room with us, most of whom just, when a question was asked, didn't answer it. I'm just curious, and it's just by show of hands, how many of us didn't answer because we were nervous to answer? I just don't know who was the better king, Saul and David. I can't even hardly remember who those guys were.
Right.
And Linda and Melody and Joe, if you could just hand clap or something, or not do anything, that's fine. But at least one of us, yep, okay, Melody's in there, Cheryl's in there. Yeah, so I think that speaks even more to our point, and your point, Brendan, that I think you're trying to drive home, is that it's unfortunate, but it's true. We really don't have a great understanding of even just the narrative of our Bibles, which is a 1,200-page book that while it's incredibly complicated, you could never plummet the depths of it, is actually pretty straightforward as well. Like there's an arc between Genesis and Revelation. There's the development of a kingdom. There's the being sent off into exile. There's historical markers. There's all these kind of things going on that are pretty easy to discern. And yet, when it comes to our political life, it does seem to me that we're somewhat happy maybe to accept whatever narrative is coming our way from somebody else, though the daily news might actually be far more complex than the biblical narrative.
Or at least they're comparably complex.
At least, yeah. So I'm just curious, how many of us in here, by show of hands, you don't have to say anything, have met somebody that knows? I mean, they know what is the right political vantage point or perspective. They've met somebody. It could be themselves, but they don't have to confess to that. I know you've met somebody who knows to a 100% certitude. This is the right perspective to hold. Now, Brendan's making a confession, but so just Cheryl and I and Brendan have met somebody who's certain about their political beliefs, so certain that it's like kind of makes you uncomfortable. I'm a little surprised by that. Everybody else meets people that are kind of middle of the road. I'm not sure.
I find that if somebody feels that confident, that I'm very wary of them. So I kind of.
I'm not saying wary or not. I'm just saying, have you met someone like that?
Well.
In your life?
I mean, I just stay clear.
Yeah. Have you met somebody who like just knows? And they will tell you what you ought to know as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is why you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Exactly why you feel uncomfortable.
Which is why, yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, so I found that this might go against like dinner conversation rules, but whenever somebody brings up whatever political agenda they're trying to force, one, I always turn it to their policies. So I always ask, well, what are the policies of, say, that individual? Which, if the person knows what the policies are, then it gives me a little bit more leniency to talk to them and to hear what they have to say. If somebody can't tell me what the policies of that individual or of what that party is, then I tend to just say, I think you need to do some more homework. And that tends to end the conversation. But for that to happen, I have to know what the policies are, right? Like that's the caveat to asking that question, is I have to know what policies are valid, what policies I agree with, what policies I don't agree with, which is really, really hard. And then I actually tend to just ask, like, I tend to just try to cut through. I call it, and I'm sorry about this, but I'm a police officer, not a pastor anymore, so I can say it, but I'm going to edit it for Bo's sake. I cut through the BS, right? Like I asked them.
My initial?
There you go. Brendan said it, not me.
I'm still a professor, so bullshit.
I try to say, I'm like, why are you really voting for that person? Or why do you really feel like that's something that you need to hammer home? Or why are you really supporting that? I have this conversation all the time with people, because everybody assumes that because I'm a police officer, they know what my political agenda is. And no one knows what my political agenda is. And I like to keep it that way, which is really hard to do in a two-party system. But like, that's the beauty of it, is that like, I don't have a party that I support. I have policies that I actually think are valid, that help society move along into a better version of ourselves. Um, and so yeah, it limits me in the general election on a regular basis. And so I have to choose a party if I want to participate in the general election. But on the other hand, no one can nail me down because I don't follow a certain party. I follow policies. And so I love to just like actually ask people what that is and why they are doing what they're doing or why they vote for what they vote for. And you can tend to find reasons why. Like it's, if you listen, just like if you listen to people who tell you their interpretations of the Bible, there tends to be, we tend to show our hand really quickly on why we say read scripture a certain way or why we vote a certain way. But again, that just comes with being educated and also just being respectful. So there are certain people that I know that I can be blunt with, and then there are certain people that I know I have to be polite to, and I'm aware of that.
So
because I recognize that we share the community together.
out of that, Patrick, I want to ask two questions. One is to open up the floor again, but one is to have each of us respond. Sorry, my family is having, I don't know what they're doing over there.
Having fun.
One is, yeah, they're probably having a lot of fun. One is the pigeonhole thing, because I'm curious to ask Patrick and Brendan and then myself, where do we find ourselves being pigeonholed in our different perspective roles as professor, police officer, and pastor? But then I do want to get into how do we then, the three of us, or mostly the two of you, enter into conversations with people who may back us into a corner and pigeonhole us. I have a feeling what's going to happen on each side of myself here. I happen to be center of the screen, which is so funny because I don't know if that's happening for anybody else, but here's Patrick to my left and Brendan to my right, and it's poetic. But I'm curious to open up the floor. Well, have us talk, but then open up the floor once again. What are we encountering in terms of civil discourse or uncivil discourse, if that's a word? We've had two debates unfold over the last couple of weeks, but Brendan, I guess I want to start with you. Like, you're a professor at a liberal arts institution, a private school, but a very, in terms of its religiosity, has kind of taken a sort of a departure, I guess, from their roots. Mm-hmm. Like, I know you serve on some committees where you are expected to toe a line, and I'm just curious as to what that experience is like.
That's a great question, Bo. Thank you. Still here. No, honest. So I don't know, man. I would sort of sidestep that question and say where I found, and we've talked, the three of us, Bo and Patrick and I have talked about this before, but where I found the capacity, and both Bo and Patrick, not to give up your position, Patrick, to engage in another person, is taking that, I don't know, empathetic, confessional perspective. So here it is, right? I believe in a God that is empathetic. And I believe in a God who listens to other people. And I believe that that's the only way that life goes. And so oftentimes I'm in the position, well, in the academy, it tends to lean left. I want to listen to that, but I also respond backwards and say, but what about the other side? But if you can only, I don't know, like engagement, I don't know, man. I just lost your question. to be honest with
I'm going to throw in some
Yeah.
Hebrew, some Old Testament terms for
Yeah,
you.
please
Because
do.
as you were saying, I was like, man, I wish that I
Yeah.
was here in that conversation 2 weeks ago. Like
Yeah.
the God who sees and the God who hears, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the God of the Old
That's
Testament.
exactly right. That's exactly. In fact, to your point, when Abraham is arguing with God in Genesis 18, when God is going to say, "I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah," and Abraham argues with God, and God says, "I will go down and see if the outcry is really that great."
Right.
Right. So I guess the whole point is like, just listen.
Right.
And to that point, before you jump in, Patrick, hold your thought.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a part of civil discourse, is listening. And of course, as Christians, we're primed for that. I don't know that we always recognize that, but we worship the God who listens. And here is Abraham, and he's not the only character in Old Testament or New Testament for that matter. Will you take this? Do I have to accept this cup? Negotiation with God is totally acceptable, and in fact an important part of the progression of the story.
That's right. Can I just jump
Please,
in real quick?
And then we'll jump into Patrick, and then I
Yes.
really do want to open up to everybody else.
I encourage people to read 1 Kings 8, because this is where the clearest definition of wisdom is. And most of us, as I was raised, were taught that when Solomon, David's son, takes the throne, God says, "Ask for anything." And Solomon says, "I want wisdom." And God says, "Great, you got it." What the text says is that Solomon asked for a listening heart. And then God says, "Awesome, you have asked for a heart of wisdom." So that's the only place in the Hebrew Bible and the Bible entirely where wisdom is defined. Wisdom is defined as a listening. Sorry, I'm using this pen. As a listening heart.
You are a professor, so you're allowed to use pointers.
Thank you. If we want to be, I pick it back up. If we want to be wise, we have to first listen. We have to first listen. Full stop.
Right.
That's biblical.
I'm jumping over to you.
That's biblical. First stop. Full stop. That's biblical. Full stop. Sorry.
Yes. So all of that, I think, because we only have like 12 minutes left. So I'm going to try to keep this short so that we can have some people join in the conversation. There are 4 things that I think degrade politics as we know it, that we have seen on both sides of our U.S. political parties, that we've also seen across the ocean in Great Britain, and that if anybody paid attention to like the India politics or to like the China politics, all of these things play a part of degrading what it means to be politics. Recognizing that politics, in my understanding of it, is participating in a shared community. It's how we function as a people who are trying to live life together, right? We don't do it very well at times. We do it very well at times. The 4 things, I'm just going to say them out there and then I'm going to explain them a little bit. There is obstruction. The second one is very much like the first one, which is lack of compromise. The third one is theater. And then the fourth one is profit. I think that we can take those 4 things that I said. They're just words, so they're linguistic. So the way that I'm going to define them, they can fall into the overarching thing of lack of listening, right? Like Brendan said, like these things, when people do this, they are not listening to one another, it doesn't build up the shared community. It actually degrades our community shared together, and it creates individualism, which I would say is the problem. The root of our problem as Americans in the West is that we are so individualized that we have forgotten that we are participating in a shared community with one another. So and then, or you could also take them as obstruction and lack of compromise. I think those are like power. Those are force. Those are wills of power. I think theater, the way that I'm going to define it, I think you could use it as religion or beliefs. And I think profit, sex and money is how we do that or use that, or maybe theater. I mean, in general, I don't know. That's how I would use that, because I think those are the roots of what causes questioning, what makes campaign season so hard for us as people of faith, all of that. So obstruction is basically people unwilling to not only hear the other side, but they are going to do whatever they can to stop the other side from having any type of influence. And not just stop the other side, like it doesn't even have to be the other side. It could be all sorts of sides. They're going to do whatever they can to stop any other perspective or viewpoint from getting known or getting supported. Lack of compromise. I think if we're talking about politics, especially US politics, democracy is based upon compromise. Democracy is a realization that everybody who's participating in the system has different experiences, different beliefs, different perspectives, which means that we have to compromise on what we want to get done. We see compromise in all sorts of stuff. We see compromise in seatbelt laws. We see compromise in red lights. We see compromise in water regulations when you can only water your lawn on the odd days rather than the even days. Compromise is what makes a shared community work. We see compromise in, even locally, in husband and wife, right? In spouses. I could not live a happy life with my wife if both of us were unwilling to compromise, or a lack of compromising. Those break down our shared community. Then there's this whole idea of theater, and it's people saying whatever they want to say in order to get their agenda across, right? I'm using like the analogy of husband and wife, or of a spouse, is that if I just told Roxanne these grand gestures and I said all these things, but I didn't have a way to actually make them work, eventually she would feel like I was cheating her as a husband because I wasn't actually.
Patrick, let me write this down real quick. This may help in my notes. I just want to make sure I remember.
But yeah, if I create such a theater, if I create a display of show, if I talk about things that like don't even make sense. And I think that like we actually get this a lot. Like you can say whatever you want about Trump or about the Trump party or about conservatism. He is a man who is a master at theater, right? We know him because he was a star from The Apprentice. He understands how to put on a show. And we get a lot of that from him. But we don't just get that from him. We get it from politics, from our politics in general. We get it from Boris Johnson in the UK. Like, it makes us feel like politics then is actually something that we don't want to participate in, when it's actually something that we should be very much aware of and participating in. And then there's this whole idea of profit, where it's what can that person or what can that constituency gain from this, which I think they all of these things build off of this understanding of shared community and lack of communication. One of the things that's very prevalent right now, and I can say this because I'm a police officer, so whatever you want to say against me or for me or whatever, listen to what I have to say right now, is the fact that like racism is something that is prominent in the US. It is something that is in our history. It is something that we have tried to ignore in our history. Whiteness and white supremacy is not just a man in Southern Idaho. Whiteness and white supremacy is something that protects the values that we hold. It is something that has been found and has been documented in our founding fathers. It is something that has been found and is documented in both the North and the South in the Civil War. It is something that has been found and has been documented within our justice system. all of those things are something where a constituency, specifically white male middle classness, holds on to a power in order to propagate their agenda, which means that there is a lack of compromise, which means that there is obstruction, and which means that there is a show that is being made in order to protect this certain group of people.
So Patrick,
whether that's right.
I want a pause button right there because I want to return to my initial question.
Okay.
Because what you're saying is exactly what I'm trying to point out in terms of having some sort of civil discourse, and exactly what I was trying to say at the very beginning, where we elevate the political above the personal, is that here we have a professor, a pastor, and a police officer. Where do you find yourself being pigeonholed in terms of the political spectrum?
Yeah, I find myself being pigeonholed in this person who has to support Blue Lives Matter, right? Or All Lives Matter. And ultimately, I support the fact that, like, yeah, the systems that we are participate in are flawed. They create injustices, even the systems that we want to create justice for. And I want to participate in renewing the system so that they work for not just the betterment of a certain group of people, but for everybody involved. And so I struggle with that for a lot of reasons, because one, so I'm in a dialogue right now where I'm reading a book. I'm reading two books actually with a group of people. The first book is called, let me pick it up because I'm not very good with titles. And I would recommend that everybody reads these books.
Why Sleep Matters.
Because so you don't end up saying stuff that will get you in trouble in front of a room full of people.
The Bible.
While you're looking at one of the things, because we are running a little short on time, and we can go over, that's fine. But I think a part of the reason I pointed out at the very beginning in terms of having discourse with people to put their personhood before their politics is that there's so many assumptions that are made at the outset. And I'm not, you guys can disagree with me, and I'm going to paint in really broad brushstrokes here, but the assumption that's made about Brendan being on campus is that he's going to toe a certain line that has to do with, maybe like the farthest of the leftist agenda that you could possibly imagine. And that's just going to be his bag. And because he works in a university campus, that's of course what he thinks. And so that's projected upon him. Patrick, you work in law enforcement, and so rather than figure out who you are, I'm just going to assume that the values you hold are Blue Lives Matter, and could be, I could go even to further extremes with that, to be honest, and really categorize you in such a way that you become something that's entirely different from the person who you are. And then as pastor, I just get projected onto me whatever you think. It's almost as though most people project onto me their own beliefs, and that I hold those. And so it's a weird position, right? Because not coming out on any concrete position and being a spiritual director, it's like I'm in an automatic place of agreement, which is fine. I can kind of play that balancing act. But at the same time, what I find in the pastor is that oftentimes there's not a lot of room for me as well.
Sure.
And so the personal, right, is totally gone, because we've elevated our politics above that. And so we're not engaged with Bo the person, or Brendan the person, or Patrick the person. We're engaged with Brendan the professor, Bo the pastor, and Patrick the police officer.
Yeah. You just pulled me back. Sorry, I was really going away for a minute, and now I'm pulled back.
I needed to rein you in because you were going to name 5 different book titles.
So thank you for wrangling me in. I'm sorry for everybody that you all witnessed that.
That's why they That's why they keep me gainfully employed. Uh, so now we're at 8:00, but I want to do 2 more of these at least. But I want to hear from the people here with us. One of the things that we offered last time was some tools for giving ourselves some tools for understanding the Old Testament with the New Testament. This conversation, to be perfectly honest, I've not ever experienced a big disconnect between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I chose it purposefully as our first discussion because I thought this is going to be so much fun, and I think we're going to have really good, solid, concrete answers to these questions. In this case, I feel like it's quite a bit more complex. So I want to ask people here, what would benefit you, but also what would benefit your friends? I mean, there's 8 to 9 of us in a room, and what would benefit people that you know of, and what would benefit you out of these conversations? Because I imagine this was asked for out of our congregation, and I imagine it was asked for a reason. I also imagine that there are people that are not ready to have this conversation, and maybe, yeah, that's why there's 8 of us, which is okay. I'm not faulting that.
I'll tell you what, I'll do this all night, man.
Yeah, because
life giving.
So I'm such a thinker.
We need this.
So,
yeah,
I would like to see us in the future deal with this on a more personal and practical basis. And this goes back to something Podrick mentioned. He talked about policies. What are our values and how do they shape the way that we intend to vote? And I think it's a fair question to ask, people to say, why are you going to support Mr. Trump? Why are you going to support Mr. Biden? What are the values that you see in their policies that ring true to you? And be able to listen to one another on a very practical basis. If we can do that in a small group, we can do it in larger groups.
Yeah.
I think in some ways we're being too academic here.
And I think I think you're right, actually. I'm sorry, what's your name again? I saw you 2 weeks ago.
Bill Hostler.
Well, that's exactly what I think Patrick was saying earlier, is like, we talk this way, but in terms of policy, what does it mean? And that gets down to the brass tacks, because it gets past identities, right? It gets past, as you were saying, are we Democrat or Republican? It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. It matters what we believe in, and hopefully we can find common ground on that. So I agree with that, absolutely.
At the same time, Brandon, I think to a great deal it does matter to many people, and that's I like Bill's question. I really do, because I want to be able to answer those questions. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I arrive at those answers very easily. I certainly feel boxed in. One thing I will say is that I've always felt very theologically homeless, and I feel politically homeless as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say, sorry.
Go ahead. No,
can you hold that, Bo? Because I would say the same thing. I would say that limiting it to whether you're going to vote for Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump based upon policies, I think that's something that people have to be willing to come to. I think you do need to come to that personally, but I also think you need to come to that socially as well. And I don't know if this specific venue is something that you socially experiment in describing what those um, who you should vote for. And the only reason why I say that is because on a political level, when it's limited to two systems, two parties like this, you are never going to be fully justified in who you vote for. So if you choose to vote for President Trump, you're not going to be fully justified in voting for President Trump. And there are going to be people who are going to be offended by that. If you choose to vote for Mr. Biden, you are not going to be fully justified in voting for Mr. Biden. And there are going to be people who are offended by that. Now, I think that there might be groups, whether it be like, you know, a Monday morning coffee group with the guys or another group that ladies do. I don't know what they do, drink tea. I'm so totally playing into like gender roles, and I apologize. Or whether it be like
Patrick,
whether it be like the band group,
they could drink coffee now.
the group that you play in. I mean, like, whatever it may be, I think that like that's where you actually have those conversations. I think this is not meant to be, at least I could be wrong, I don't think that this venue is meant to be something where you describe and talk about who you're going to vote for and why you're going to vote for. And I'm posting something in the messages, which is just an NPR. Yes, it is NPR. So, I mean, there's that as well. It was a report on Catholics and who they're going to vote for and why they're going to vote for that person based upon their religious beliefs. And they interview multiple people, and there are people who are voting for Trump because they believe that the conservative right supports life, and there are people who are voting for Mr. Biden because they believe that the liberal left supports life after birth. And so like, it's a very interesting, like, I think it's like a 5-minute listen if you want. And it talks about just what we are actually saying, that politics matter, and politics are messy, and politics are complicated, and you have to have an understanding of something more than just your emotions or your feelings in order to come to some sort of conclusion. And it might not make everybody that you know happy.
But I hope that we would be able to come out of this conversation with somebody saying, I'm going to vote for Biden, or I am going to vote for Trump, and the people involved not saying, you are an absolute racist, bigot, misogynist. Right. Because of your choice.
Because of it. That's what we really want, is we want to be able to have. Yeah, I think that's what we ultimately want to have, is we want to have a community of discord, right?
Because
where we can be a community.
As the Bible says, I will show you racism on both sides. I will show you misogyny on both sides. Easy. Tell me. I will find you every news story that shows that both of them are not great guys.
Right. So, but the reality is that we're a shared community, and that is what us as Christians should be. And that's where, I mean, we haven't even gotten to that part. I mean, to the end that I said I wanted to get to, because it's clearly there needs to be more conversations than what we talked to.
I do want to wrap up our time here. I want to be.
But let me say one thing, Bo.
No.
That's why I'm actually announcing my candidacy for president. So if I have the 13 of your votes, buddy, I am good.
Well, you'll probably win the debates.
I am a racist and I am a misogynist, and I confess of those things. So at least no, actually, probably systematically I am. So
we are.
I ultimately want to say that this is just the beginning. Like, if we want to continue to have conversations, and this is just the beginning, so it's going to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, right.
It's not going to feel like wrapped up in a neat little bow.
No. So couple of things, because what excites me about what Bill is suggesting is that, well, maybe everybody can feel as lost as I feel at times. And that is, if we were to not toe a party line, but discern what are policies that we as Christians can get behind, what are policies that are unknowns, where there's a variable that we just can't possibly decide on and come to some sort of 100% consensus. But I do think there's room for that conversation. I also think, Patrick, you know, you're right. This is not the forum to kind of make decisions as to where we should land as Christians. In fact, I think a part of what excites me about the church is its ideological diversity, and that we need ideological diversity. And that's something I want to follow up on in a future conversation. But, you know, for the sake of this time together, I also want to throw back the question to the people that are still here in the room. What would be helpful to talk about? Because clearly it's hard to talk about these things. And, you know, I feel a little alone in saying, like, my brother and my father didn't talk for 18 years because of a political disagreement, but I don't sense that I'm alone. I sense that there's major disruptions to relationships over politics, and I do want to equip our church body and anybody who would join us to feel like they have some sort of tool in their tool belt. Not a solution, because I don't know that there are solutions to something like this, but you know, Bill has suggested talk policy. I want to hear from other people. What can we talk about? Because we're going to do about 2-3 more of these. What can we talk about that would be helpful? Or is politics really easy for everybody else in the room?
It's like when I go and vote for like the amendments and things to the state, you know, as for what we're doing. There's a League of Women Voters that have really done some study, and they put out both sides, and then you make the decision. But it'd be helpful for me if I would have that for the major parties to know what their policies are, because they'll say anything to get your vote almost. I mean, I don't know, or that's how I feel.
Yeah.
So I'm just like throwing darts.
You know what, the other thing I wanted to say, Barb, that I think, you know, Patrick, Brendan, and I all kind of fall into a certain age group, and the rest of the room into another wiser age group. I think that's how you define it, wiser, right? But one of the things that I was talking with my dad about recently, and I think I brought it up with Patrick and Brendan, is there has not in my lifetime been a president that didn't have a major controversy tied directly to his presidency. So I have never experienced a time where, you know, you trusted your government. I mean, that's a completely foreign idea to me, that you would think that the government's got anybody's best interest in mind. And so I feel like I belong to a generation of really cynical people, but at the same time, it's not without reason. And yet at the same time, I hear people my parents' age saying much the same thing, except they feel betrayed. They feel like this used to work and now it doesn't work. I'm of an age where I'm like, I've never known
This never worked.
This never worked.
Yeah.
Which I think in some ways makes me far less invested, probably in a negative way. I was telling Kristen the other day, I think a part of the reason that people are watching the presidential debates that are older than us is this is your patriotic duty. You watch the presidential debates and the vice presidential debates because this is a part of how you participate in being an American. I'm participating in it honestly as theater, as Patrick was mentioning. It has nothing to do with patriotism for me. I'm just, you know, and honestly, half the time I'm looking for a good joke, and that's the extent of it. So I feel like there's also this polemic between generations where we're often looking for and not looking for certain things in in a political discourse.
No, I think that's good though,
Barb,
Barb, that like we get a good description of both sides just to help, right? I think that's something we can bring. And I also think Bo is saying something very good too, that like we the younger generations don't necessarily view it as a patriotic duty anymore to vote.
Yes, Jan, please,
Barb
Jan.
made the comment.
Oh, Brendan,
Hi.
Brendan, pause, let him go.
I don't call anything I'm doing a patriotic duty. I'm taking politics more seriously. I'm taking, not politics, I'm taking what's happening with an upcoming election more seriously, trying to be more informed, trying to stop the circus, the tragedy, all of the crap that is happening to our country because of our leaders, who I don't think deserve to be called leaders, not all of them. So I'm not doing this blindly because it's patriotic. I am seriously concerned about the direction we're letting the people we've elected take our country.
Yeah.
And affect the rest of the world in negative ways. So I think that's a different thing than feeling patriotic. But
I guess I didn't mean it offensively when I said it's a patriotic duty. I think there are people who are, when I said patriotic duty, feel exactly how you feel, like that it's a very serious thing to be taken and it's not something to be taken lightly. So I guess like my understanding of patriotic duty is different than yours. I felt that it was something that people in a different generation are taking very seriously, because they view what's happening as a circus, and they view that like not only our leaders or people who they use quotes to call leaders are making a spectacle of our country. That's what I was thinking when I said patriotic duty. I didn't mean it offensively at all.
well, I didn't take it offensively, but I took it as that we're being patriotic, meaning we're being dutiful to do the job that we know we're supposed to do as citizens, as opposed to I'm trying to get more informed so that I could be more effectively involved, because it's deteriorating so badly. Yeah. So I didn't take offense at the word patriotic duty, but it's sometimes patriotic can mean can be more superficial.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jan, for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Which is another topic I would love to discuss, which is language itself, where terms get really.
I would love to.
Yeah, go ahead,
Jan. I love that. I love your discourse on that. And I don't know, right? Like, what does it mean? I think I heard you say the direction in which this country is going, and I'm concerned about that too. And I don't know. We don't want to talk about that now, but this is what we're promoting: is what is that direction, and how do other people see that direction going, right? Like, I love your passion. I see it. I think about myself. I think about other people in my community. I think about other people in my largest circle, and I want to say, what do we think is the direction it's going, and what is the direction other people think it's going, if that makes sense. And that's what I want to foster. Not that your perception is wrong, but how do we do it right,
Well, I want to hear from, before we close, I want to hear from just a few others. How can we be of help in the next 2 to 3 sessions of this particular meeting, what can we address that would it would be helpful? That would be a good conversation to have. Because this is we're
Well,
really
this may
scratching the surface tonight. This is such a complex.
This may be like the vice presidential debate. A question is raised and the person who answers what they want to say rather than what the question happens to be. And that was true oftentimes. But I want to share a little something that Barb's comment brought up to me of wanting to know what the parties stand for. Because I grew up within the Republican Party and had certain values of what I thought Republicanism meant. We moved to the state of Nebraska, and I found there that those same values were where the Democrats were, and the Republicans were much more conservative. And so if I wanted to stay true to my values, I had to change parties. Now, do you stay loyal to the party name, or do you stay loyal to your values? So we became Democrats. And then we moved to Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, both the Republicans and the Democrats were much more liberal. And so we were feeling like we were more like the Republicans than we were the Democrats. And then we moved to Colorado, which is not as liberal as either one, but time had evolved and my values and my perception, my naivety had diminished, and I vote sometimes Republican, sometimes Democrat. I used to do it mainly on agenda items. But increasingly I'm starting to think the person and the values are so critical to where we're going that is, will the policies be implemented, or is it just the personal values that are there? And so that's the conflict. And honestly, I believe a lot of the Republican Party is now really frustrated that the values that they had held no longer are held by the Trump portion of the Republican Party. The item of conservatism in terms of finances, anti-Russia, a lot of values on tariffs, free trade, a lot of things have shifted. And I honestly believe that we're in a process of redefining where the parties are going to be. Long term.
It's so funny.
I actually hope,
Jim, because there was someone asked me at one point in time, I really don't like to divulge, my political perspectives. But somebody asked me at one point in time, where do I find myself aligning? And I just watched a documentary on Bobby Kennedy. And I said, I think I'm a late 60s Democrat. It's like, I don't really find but anyways, this documentary was fascinating. And I thought, yeah, like that guy was awesome. But I think a late 60s Democrat might be a 1990s Republican. I'm not sure.
Right.
It's just,
I think that
it's like a moving
that
target.
speaks to, I think that speaks to like what we were talking about, that like you can't get pigeonholed on a side, because a two-party system actually is limited in the fact that there's so much differences that are being expressed. And I hope with you, Mr. Clay, that like we are on a new definition of politics in the US, because that would be great if we could open up to where it's not just a two-party system any longer.
And Mr. Clay, you're also arguing for federalism, not in the European sense, but in the American sense of where you are, you vote for your values and what you want for your state. And some would argue that the federal government has far too much power in making policies for local decisions, which actually, returning to Patrick's original statements about politics, and policy. If there is a central government making so many decisions, politics, the participation in the process reduces significantly, and we know who benefits from that. So
we got to wrap up here. We're almost at 1/2 the hour. I do want to leave on this because it'll irritate Brendan a little bit, but it'll be fodder for our next discussion.
then I have the last word.
Oh, I live to irritate you at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Walter Brueggemann, your favorite Old Testament scholar, correct?
No, I am my old favorite Old Testament scholar. Jesus. Look me up. Google me.
Walter Brueggemann happens to, I mean, he left some sermon. It wasn't a sermon. It was a talk that he was giving, but he ended saying, I just so happen to believe that these values could be implemented by a highly centralized government. Which
that's funny because he critiques the Solomonic government and the prophetic imagination. So
it was a strange way to leave it, but there he was taking a very clear political stance in the context.
Well, watch Star Wars. I mean, the answer is
the Empire.
But yes, well, watch Star Wars. Star Wars is a classic example of motifs coming together, and it's all biblical. You can also read 1 Kings 12, where the centralized government wants to overhand the republic. If the republic has too much power, it's problematic. If the centralized government has too much power, it's problematic. We understand this. But the wrapping up point, David is a wonderful king. He's the best king. He's the man after God's own heart.
And yet he's wrong.
And yet Saul is better.
He's better.
That's the Bible, and that's politics, and that is reality.
So we've been left with no answers.
No, because to I think several people's points, wisdom is in the context of the community, right? Is this right for our community? Is it wrong? And back to the Star Wars argument, when somebody up here is telling you what's right or wrong, man, that takes you out of it. Where's our hand in it? And Patrick's original statement of politics means participation in government, and we've lost that. And so you can be Democrat or Republican, and we've lost that. Either way. And so the hope is, I don't know, right? Like your state senator is not just a state senator anymore. He's or she is the state senator and not the federal senator, if you get my point. Let people make decisions where the communities are, because that's where conversation happens. That's where relationships are. That's where wisdom manifests itself. But that's me.
Yeah.
And it's biblical, and it's what Jesus says. So anyway, good night.
Sayonara. Okay. I would love to have some. Yeah. Did you just do a mic drop?
Well, phone drop. That's all I had. I should have done better. Embarrassed.
Epic fail. Well,
Yeah,
I would love to have more of these conversations. And
I'm distressed. I've already voted. Again, I can't go change.
Hey, good for you, Joe, for voting.
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
already voted.
Good for you.
But Joe, you can talk to your
Wednesday, November the 5th, the sun's going to rise, the creation will be there, and I will be God's child, regardless.
Amen. It
Yes,
will
you will.
be. I agree.
Yep.
that is the God's truth that we ought to end this meeting on.
All right, loves.
Yeah. Amen to that, Joe. I really believe everything you just said.
That's the first time you ever did.
That's true. That's true.
That's a good pastor.
I've never even liked anything you've said before that. Well, much love to everybody. I hope you have a great night. Please send me some feedback. Shoot me an email, pastorbo@fbc.org, fbcdurango.org. We want to have about 2 more of these, one before the election and one post-election. I would love to be able to just be helpful. I hope just conversing is helpful, but just a forum to talk and share with each other, and I think is positive, but help us to make this as good of an experience for you all as possible. Sound good? God's grace and peace be with you all. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right.